Song of Solomon, chapter 4. Last week we did the entirety of chapter 3, which was basically the wedding ceremony. How many of you guys have ever been to a wedding ceremony? Okay, good. How many of you haven't, I guess? Let me ask that. Who has never been to an actual wedding ceremony? No, just one, two. There's a couple that won't raise their hands that probably haven't. All right. Now, for everyone that went, did you enjoy it? Yeah? Anybody not enjoy it? Why? Too long? Okay. It was boring? Yeah. Gotcha. That's how Whitney and I's was. It was supposed to be warm and ended up being like freezing. And it was outdoors. So everyone has different experiences, but most of us have been to a wedding ceremony. Now I have been able to officiate 3 different weddings. It seems like they're all pretty similar, but they're all different in a sense. One thing that I've noticed as I've done them is that the ceremony, obviously the, what's it called after the ceremony? I always forget. Reception is a lot different in every single one. Like it's basically based on the personality of the couple. But same thing with the ceremony. It's really unique to the couple's personality. And so for one, we had one that was kind of, it was fun. And for one, we had that was, it was serious, it was long, it was a lot of different things that they wanted implemented within their ceremony that others haven't really ever seen done. And then another one was really it was simple. It was just simple. And it was straightforward. It was awesome. It was done in like 20 minutes. And that's what a ceremony should never really be long. Unless you go to a Catholic ceremony, it's going to take a couple days. But a ceremony should last somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes, right? And so what we see as we read through chapter 3 was this getting ready for the ceremony, or the ceremony itself, the presentation, the beginning of the ceremony coming. We see Solomon making his way in verse 6 as he comes in, as you guys remember, on his little traveling couch. If you guys remember this, he's got 60 valiant men with him. So it's a big thing, right? And again, it's different based on culture as well, how a ceremony is going to look. But pretty much every culture has a ceremony when it comes to a wedding. And the ceremony is really, really important. But the most important part in a ceremony, there's one thing that you cannot forget to have in a ceremony. And I tell this to every couple. I tell them, every couple, it's only been 3. But I tell the couples that, okay, you can't not have this. Everything else, we can do it. We don't have to do it. It's up to you. Anybody, can you guess what is that one thing that you have to have in a ceremony? A ring? No, the ring doesn't matter. Flowers definitely don't matter. Oh, vows. I thought you said flowers. I'm like, flowers, what? Yeah, vows. Vows are the most important part of the ceremony. So the exchanging of the vows. And so we've had, couples that, they do traditional vows that, just repeat after me. And then we've had couples who would write their own vows. And, the exchanging of the vows is the most important part because that is the actual covenant that you are making between a man and a woman with God. Okay, so that's the most important aspect of a ceremony. So we've got the ceremony that's happening in chapter 3, as well as the covenant. It's kind of implied in this. We see the covenant, throughout Scripture, right? We've got the covenant promise in Genesis 2:24. We know the act of marriage is consisted of 3 things, which is leaving, right? What do you leave when you get married? What do you leave?
Your parents.
Yeah, your parents, your father and your mother. And then you join together, right? You join together through this covenant, and you become one flesh. And part of that one flesh is what we're going to see today, which can be seen in a physical union, but also in a spiritual union. I think the spiritual union happens as we make this covenant before God, but then we have this physical union as we see consummated after the wedding, which will be on the wedding night. So we're going to see this in chapter 4. This is basically the entirety of chapter 4. So I'm going to encourage you, if you can, and I know you can do this, is to help me be as mature as possible as we get through this. Okay? I'm not going to go into super fine details of things, but I do want to explain this biblically of what this means. So again, the covenant is the most important aspect of the marriage, which we find within the vows. Malachi chapter 2, verse 14 says this, as the prophet writes. He says, "Yet you say, for what reason?" The answer is, because the Lord has been witness. Okay, so the Lord is a witness. He's a part of this between you and the wife of your youth, with whom you have dealt treacherously, yet she is your companion and your wife by covenant. This is what Malachi says. Okay, so he's implying here, not even implying, but he's saying that a marriage covenant is not just between you and your wife of your youth, but also with the Lord, right? The Lord is the witness who is a witness to the vows or the promises that you have made, which we find in the covenant. And as we know, or as we should know, that when it comes to marriage and it comes to the marriage that God has designed, we go in with the intent that it lasts a lifetime. Is this correct? Yes. Okay. Now, because we are sinners, right? Now remember, when God designed marriage, he designed it when Adam and Eve were in perfection. Then sin came along. Okay, well now when sin came along, God has allowed certain things for a marriage to be broken. Okay, so we find in Scripture that there's two reasons given, and it's never really God's heart or intent for a couple to get divorced, but I think that's the kind of mentality that we have in America, or just in general now, that if I go into marriage, I know that I can break this contract just by divorcing my spouse. But when we go into it with the intent of, okay, this is a covenant I've made before God, it's everlasting, it's a lifetime, well, we handle things differently. We do things differently, right? It's more valuable to us. So there's two things that God allows, two reasons why God allows a divorce. Anybody know what those are? Yes? No. Anyone else? Yes. So if one person is a believer and one isn't, and the one who isn't walks away and doesn't want to be married anymore, then the one who is a believer can allow that to happen, right? It should never be of the believer's accord to walk away, okay? The second reason is if there's sexual immorality. Okay, so those are the two reasons that God gives. And I think, we have a hard time with the abuse part. And, I would never say to someone like stick in the marriage or stay with that person if they're physically or any way abusing you. I think that would fall under the category of one being a believer and one not being a believer. Okay, and I would just encourage someone to not stick in that specific space with that person and put yourself in a position to be abused. Okay, I'm not saying get divorced, but again, you don't ever put yourself in a position to hurt yourself. So those are the two reasons that God allows. But again, why does God allow that? Well, because sin has entered, right? But that was never his intent. So we've got the ceremony of a wedding. We've got the covenant of a wedding. Again, it's supposed to be lifelong. You go into it understanding, okay, this is forever in the sense of how long I live, right? We always say, until death do us part, right? I guess that could be another reason, but that's not a divorce. And then we've got the consummation, which is the act of consuming something to the full or fulfillment of some goal or desired outcome. Basically, it implies perfection or completion. So the completion of it all is found in the physical union that we find between one husband and one wife after the covenant they have made before God. All right, this is what we see all throughout Scripture. We see this in Genesis 2:24, Matthew 19:5, Ephesians 5:31, because every time we see Jesus talk about marriage, he always talks about how good it is between one man and one woman, right, who is a husband and a wife, and how bad it is when anytime the man or the woman steps outside of that marriage with anyone else, the sexual immorality, right? And then, we've got the Pharisees, we've got the Sadducees who always challenge Jesus and say, well, when can such and such get, divorced here and there? And Jesus is telling them, he doesn't say it like outright, but implying that, look, stop thinking in such a way that you can find a way out to get divorced. Because what they would do is they would find anything, any reason to get a divorce from their spouse. Like if they found someone prettier in their eyes than their spouse, then they could say, hey, let's get divorced, or you burnt the chicken, whatever, let's get a divorce. And Jesus is like, no, that's not the intent. Don't stop looking for a way out. That's not good for the marriage. That's not good. That's not why God has designed it or how God has designed it. So this consummation is this completion, right, where we have two separate people. They leave their families. They come together. They make one flesh. We find this in the spiritual union, but also in the physical union. Okay, and this marks the beginning of the marriage. And so we're going to find this here in chapter 4 tonight. So let's go ahead and read it, and then we'll break it down. So the beloved is speaking. Who is the beloved? Is that the man or the woman? The man. Good. This is Solomon speaking to his wife, and he's going to speak about 95% of this chapter, and then the last verse, the Shulamite woman is going to respond with one verse. So in verse 1 of chapter 4, he says, "Behold, you are fair, my love. Behold, you are fair. You have dove's eyes behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats going down from Mount Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of shorn sheep, which have come up from the washing, every one of which bears twins, and none is barren among them. Your lips are like a strand of scarlet, and your mouth is lovely. Your temples behind your veil are like a piece of pomegranate. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built for an armory, on which hang 1,000 bucklers, all shields of mighty men. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle, which feed among the lilies. Until the day breaks and the shadows flee away, I will go my way to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense. You are all fair, my love, and there is no spot in you. Come with me from Lebanon, my spouse, with me from Lebanon. Look from the top of Amana, from the top of Senir and Hermon, from the lions' dens, from the mountains of the leopards. You have ravished my heart, my sister, my spouse. You have ravished my heart with one look of your eyes, with one link of your necklace. How fair is your love, my sister, my spouse. How much better than wine is your love, and the scent of your perfumes than all the spices. Your lips, O my spouse, drip as the honeycomb. Honey and milk are under your tongue, and the fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. A garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. Your plants are an orchard of pomegranates with pleasant fruits, fragrant henna with spikenard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, with all the chief spices, a fountain of gardens, a well of living waters, and streams from Lebanon." And here the Shulamite woman responds, "Awake, O north wind, and come, O south, blow upon my garden, that its spices may flow out. Let my beloved come to his garden and eat its pleasant fruits." There's a lot happening here. And man, Solomon God did give him wisdom, because the way that he speaks is, you would never find one of us speaking that way, because we are too stupid to ever speak that way. I'd be like, wow, you look really pretty. Like that's, But here, the way he's so descriptive, it's really, really amazing. And again, one thing that I want to look at is this is really twofold. So we don't want to take for granted that this is just an allegory or a picture of just Jesus in the church. Okay, obviously, the intent of that is there. And we're going to see the similarities. We're going to see that balance. But also, this really is happening. Okay, this is a love story. This is a relationship that is happening between a man and a woman, between the Shulamite and the beloved, between Solomon and this woman. And so after chapter 3, after the ceremony and the covenant has been established, well, now we find ourselves in the consummation. And before they even get into the consummation, where they get into the physical act, we see here that Solomon is continuing, as we've seen him do. Like, his character doesn't change from the beginning to the end. If anything, like, his character grows. So here he has the opportunity, okay, like, they've done everything really, really well. They've done it, upright. They've done it honorably. They've obeyed the Lord's commands. We understand, we see how hard it's been for them to do the right thing, right? Because they've been so enraptured and in love that, like, they have a hard time of that self-control, but they've been able to establish that self-control. And now they're married. And now, since they're married and they've made that covenant, like, they have this freedom to enjoy one another, like God has designed. Yet Solomon is still showing the self-control that even before he touches her with his hands, he's going to touch her with his words. He goes into this, again, not in a selfish manner, but in a selfless manner. Again, really speaking to her and encouraging her and, saying all these wonderful, pleasant things that to you and I, in the time that we live in, is like, okay, again, you're equating her hair to goat's hair. That doesn't really sound, so romantic. But again, in that time, we're going to see how that really is a romantic and thoughtful thing. Again, equating things to pomegranates and this and that. It was really, really beautiful how he describes these things. And so what he does, again, is he's complimenting her beauty. He's appreciating. He's rendering her affection that is due to her, not as a woman, but as a wife. Right? Now that they are married, he is rendering affection to her that is due to her as a wife. And Paul actually says that and encourages that to us as husbands and to you as future husbands, to your future wife. He says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 3, let the husband render to his wife the affection due her. It's wrong for a husband to withhold any affection from his wife. Right? Because what does Jesus do for his bride? He doesn't ever withhold his affection from us. Right? He provides that affection for his bride. And so Solomon does that. He does his duty. He does it through the self-control that he has, through the appreciation that he has for his wife. And what he does too is that he's going to start basically from the top of her head to the bottom of her feet, and just in a general sense reminding her of how beautiful she is to him. No matter what she thinks of herself, he wants to encourage her and remind her, you are beautiful. And I think Jesus does that for us. I don't know, like if you've ever gone through like a bad day or you've done something and you're like, man, I feel like a crummy person. Like maybe you didn't even do anything and just that's the thoughts that you have. Like how does Jesus love me? How does anyone like me? And then what happens is Jesus never withholds his affection. And you read his word or somebody speaks his word to you or just comes and speaks a word of knowledge and encouragement and exhorts you and says something, and you're like, man, God loves me and God sees me as beautiful, even though sometimes I don't see myself that way. Because sometimes we have a wrong view of ourselves, that sometimes we can see ourselves in the negative light, like we're too bad, when in fact God has already redeemed us and he's already saved us, and he sees us as spotless. He sees us as clean. He sees us as pure. Like he says, his church to him is gorgeous, right? It's beautiful. And I think that's what Solomon does to her as a person, because, she has these insecurities. We saw this in chapter 1, right? She felt as if she had blemishes. And I'm sure for everyone in this room, we could all speak to that, that we have these things in our mind, the things that we think of ourselves, these blemishes, doubting. And yet what he does is he encourages her and he says, no, you're perfect to me. You're perfect to me. Even though you think you may have these blemishes. Remember, she's like, my skin's too dark. He's like, no, you're beautiful. You're lovely. And so he goes on. He's gonna compliment physical features of her. 7 physical features. And I like this. There's 7 in here that we see. You could maybe say there's 8 because the temples and cheeks, you can maybe split up as 2. But I think we're gonna kind of put those 2 together because they're very similar. So he's gonna compliment her eyes, her hair, her teeth, her lips, her temples and cheeks, her neck, and her breasts. So 7 physical features that he's going to describe and he's going to praise to, again, this is going to uplift her, it's going to encourage her. And what this is doing, it's building her trust, it's building the intimacy. Like there's this building, like in any good movie, right? It builds the story until there's a climax, right? And so in this, like with this relationship, it's building, and then there's going to be a climax. So there's 7 things that he's going to, again, mention and compliment. And 7 is always the number of what in the Bible? Completion, perfection, right? So he's going to give these 7 compliments and praises. I think, again, just to imply of how perfect she is in his eyes. And that's what matters. And so, again, he's going into this selfless. He's focused on her, not himself. He's taken aback by her beauty. We're going to see as he describes this, as, her beauty is better than, that her love is better than wine, that he's enraptured with her beauty, all these things. And so first he says here in verse 1, he says, behold, you are fair, my love, behold, you are fair. Again, just this general sense that you're just beautiful. And as he's already described, you're the most beautiful, right? You're the lily amongst what? How does he say it? You're the lily amongst thorns, right? She says, I'm the lily of, what is it? I'm the lily of the valleys. Basically saying, I'm the lily amongst the lilies. Like, I'm the most beautiful of the most beautiful. And he's like, no, you are the only one who is beautiful. And you are the most beautiful. Everyone else compared to you is thorns. And so he starts off in a general sense here in verse 1, but then he gets intentional. And I like this, because I think sometimes we as guys, we're not as intentional. We're not as we don't notice things really well. Your wife, well, maybe you guys don't know this because you're not married yet, but your wife will get a haircut and she'll chop off like 3 centimeters. And she's like, hey, notice anything about me? And you're like, no. She's like, oh, just got a haircut. You didn't notice? My wife doesn't do that, but you get the point. To be intentional, right? Like, so could you tell, I wonder how many husbands could actually tell what color eyes their wives have? I don't know. I'd be interested. So, but that's the first thing, is he compliments her eyes. He says, you have dove's eyes. And again, I don't know what the purpose of, relating it to doves are. I don't know if doves have beautiful eyes and or looked into a dove's eyes. I don't know if anyone has. But he says, you have dove's eyes. Maybe she had really tiny eyes. I don't know. But again, the point here is that he's being specific. He notices her eyes. Okay? And then he says this, it's behind your veil. Right? Well, what's so special about the veil? Well, this was a unique thing. Like, obviously, in our times, when are you going to wear a veil? When you get married. The only times I can really think of is when you wear a veil is at a wedding or a funeral. Right? And obviously, in this instance, it's with a wedding. And I think the same thing in their culture. It was a unique thing. And so, obviously, this is the end of their wedding ceremony, beginning of their consummation. She still has her veil on, but he notices her eyes. He compliments her eyes. But then he moves on. He turns to her hair, and he says, your hair is like a flock of goats going down from Mount Gilead. Okay, now again, the idea here is not that her hair looks like a goat, because I don't think that would be the greatest of compliments, because goat's hair is coarse and ugly, but I think the picture, rough and short, which is nothing wrong with short. But here, with Palestinian goats in their culture, they actually had long, wavy black hair. And so, what happens is if you get this imagery in this picture, is that if you have like a herd of goats who are running down the mountainside, what you're going to see in totality in the wholeness of the herd is just this one long flowing black hair. And so that's the description that he's giving, that he's telling us, okay, her hair is beautiful, it flows, it's long, it's black. Again, just being intentional with complimenting her looks. So verse 2 goes on to compliment the third feature of her, which is her teeth. Okay? He says, your teeth are like a flock of shorn sheep, which have come up from the washing, every one which bears twins, and none is barren among them. So the third compliment, the third praise, with a third feature, but the third time equating it to an animal, right? So the first one was the dove, then we have the goats, and now we have the sheep. He says, your teeth are like a flock of shorn sheep. Now, why use animals? I think one way we could look at this, and then he's going to also use not just animals, but fruit and spices, is that all those things are natural, right? Like, it's nature. And so I think what he's really implying is that the things that he's complimenting are just her natural beauty, right? Equating it to nature and similar to nature. And so again, he says, your teeth are like a flock of shorn sheep. Again, the idea is not that her teeth are woolly or hairy, right? But the fact that they all look the same. So after, the sheep get their hair cut, they all look the same, right? And what happens after you wash a sheep? Are they dirty or are they clean? They're clean, right? He says, which have come up from washing. So they've been washed, they're clean. So he's implying her teeth are clean. That's nice, right? Then he says here that everyone which bears twins. Well, what does that mean? That means they each complement each other, that they match each other, right? They don't have all these nice teeth and then one's like sticking up this way. Just saying you have nice, perfect teeth. And then he goes on to say, as he finishes this description of her teeth, that none is barren among them. Well, what does that mean? She's not toothless, right? She's not over there, missing her two front teeth. They're all complete. Again, being very descriptive of just, again, noticing. And maybe her teeth weren't perfect. But again, to him, were they? Yeah. And is that all that matters? Yeah, that's all that matters. And so he tells her, which again is going to build up her confidence, which is going to build the trust, which is going to build the intimacy, which is building up to this climax. So, verse 3, we'll look at the fourth praise, the fourth feature. He says, your lips are like a strand of scarlet, and your mouth is lovely. And here, the fifth one, your temples behind your veil are like a piece of pomegranate. Again, the idea here is just describing that her lips are thin. Right? And I think in that time, in the days that we live in, I think women want their lips to be full, so they get like lip injections and I don't know what they get. What do they get? Is it Botox? Lip injections? They put something, I don't know what it is. But they want like big puffy lips, right? And I think the point behind that is because that is what I believe they think that is attractive in our time, in our day, in our culture. Right? But in this time, we see that thinner lips were actually more attractive in this day. And so he's describing them again as a strand of scarlet, and your mouth is lovely, that they're well outlined, right? That they're beautiful. Scarlet is the color of what? Red, right? So that it has a beautiful, deep red color. And then he moves on to her temples. He says, behind your veil are like a piece of pomegranate. And I think, again, here just describing like this, her cheeks being rosy, her cheeks being, ruby red. Then he moves on to her neck. And he says, your neck is like the Tower of David, built for an armory on which hang 1,000 bucklers, all shields of mighty men. Now, I think here is where we get a little bit of a transition from, okay, not just the physical aspect of her neck, but also now we're going to look at more of her character, right? That there is a physical beauty of her, but also this beauty of her character. Because, again, it's not like she has a long neck. It's not like she has a weak neck. Because in that time, if you remember, as we've studied through the Word of God, is that really there's two ways to look at a neck, or three ways to look at a neck. Is that one, sometimes if it's bent over, it's a picture of humiliation. We also see, as Jesus describes the Israelites more often than not, that he calls them a blank-necked group of people. You guys remember what it is? Stiff-necked, right? He calls them a stiff-necked group of people. And what does it mean to be stiff-necked? It means that you are stubborn, right? It means that you are not going to obey. There is no grace and humility within you. And so we've got this picture of humiliation. We've got the picture of stubbornness. But here in this description, likening it into a Tower of David built for an armory, it's a picture of strength, right? And so I don't think he's just implying, man, you got like really nice deltoids and a really thick neck, like it's really strong. Like I don't think that's what he's implying in the physical aspect, but in the character aspect that she holds her head up high, right? That she has strength, she has dignity to her. She's not walking around with her head down. She's not walking around with her head, her neck stiff, but rather it's strong, symbolizing the strength of her character. And I think this is what he's praising her here for. And then he looks upon what is on her neck, as I think what the implication here is at the end of verse 4 is the necklace that she's wearing, but he describes it as such. He says, on which hang 1,000 bucklers, all shields of mighty men. And so again, there's this deeper meaning The stones and the shields of warriors are both symbols of strength. And again, it's clear here that she walks around with her head held high and that she is a strong and dignified woman. And so he adds a little bit more than just the physical aspect. So then we get to the last one in verse 5. He says, your two breasts are like fawns, twins of a gazelle, which feed among the lilies. And so what I've been in saying is all the way up into this point, he's been very intentional to keep things non-sexual. That everything that he has commented on has been just a feature of, normality, like eyes and lips and nose. I don't know if he's complimented her nose. Maybe she didn't have a nice nose. I don't know. But he's complimented these simple things, and yet he gets to this point, and again, it just shows the self-control that he's had. It shows that they both abided by the encouragement that they've given us here 3 times in this book, the first time being in chapter 2, verse 7, where she says, do not stir up nor awaken love until it pleases. Right? So not until this moment where now it pleases has he actually made these statements and pointed out how beautiful these things are to him. Does this make sense? The time now pleases. It's now appropriate. Within the confines, within this area where they're at, they now can do this. And what's awesome is that it's been such a good build-up that it's going to be amazing, right? And it's going to continue to be amazing. But one thing I want to look at in regards to this verse is going back to Proverbs, where we find a similarity in Proverbs chapter 5, verse 19. And this is what it says. It says, as a loving deer and a graceful doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times and always be enraptured with her love. And what we're going to see as we continue through this chapter is that the woman's body is made for her husband, and her husband's body is made for her, right? And we're going to see this not just through this chapter, but we see this all throughout Scripture whenever it's brought up, right? Jesus says that, Paul says that you are made for one another to treat each other as if it was your own body, right? Now, again, that is all within the confines of what? Marriage, right? Within marriage. It's not a taboo thing. It's not a bad thing. But it can be bad, again, when we start to dabble in these things and we start to do these things before it pleases, right? Before the right time, which we find in the confines of marriage. Because every time that Jesus talks about sexual immorality, in regards to the confines of marriage, it's always found outside the marriage, right? Now, obviously, there can be sexual immorality within the marriage, but when he's talking about the marriage, it's oftentimes found before or outside the marriage. And so what Proverbs says, it says, always be enraptured with her love. And I like that because really what it implies is being intoxicated, right? To be intoxicated always in her love. Now, obviously, you probably have never been intoxicated, but you know what it means. You've seen movies. You understand. It's usually described, like in the Old Testament in Isaiah, that it implies like a man staggering down the street, right? When we were in Philly, that's what it looked like. I remember when we were in, obviously I've seen this everywhere, people being drunk. But I remember one of the first times that I really saw it, like in totality, was when we were in England, and we were above a pub, and we stayed up at night and just watched people like walking into poles and windows, and I'm like, what is this? What's the enticement of that? To get so drunk that you can't stand and you can't walk. And so again, that's the idea, the picture that we get, to be enraptured, to be intoxicated, basically implying that you are so crazy in love with your wife, right? To be always enraptured with her, right? That you are head over heels in love with her. Now again, that is the intention of marriage, that marriage is not supposed to be boring, right? Our relationship with Christ is not supposed to be boring. It's not supposed to be robotic. It's not supposed to be stagnant, right? We can find that within marriages, now we can find that in people's relationship with Christ, but that has never been the intention. It's always to be in a sense, as described, intoxicating, like that we do have the emotions, that we do have the desires, and I think the question begs is, how can I be head over heels in love with my wife? Or how can you be head over heels in love with Christ? Right? How can that happen? Right? Well, I think it's this. I think you choose to be so. I think it's a choice. It's not just some magical fairy dust. It's not some love potion. It's not just some mystical force that gives you these emotions and feelings. But no, I think it's truly a choice. And I think when you decide to love, then those things follow. And I really believe, too, that love stimulates love. And so how does that happen? Well, okay, how am I becoming head over heels over for Christ? Well, allow him to love you, right? 1 John 4:19 says that he loves us, that we love God because what? He first loved us. So because he loves us, it stimulates a love for us, in us for him, in the same way it does between a husband and a wife. And this is what I encouraged husbands and wife at our past marriage conference this year, that, I think many of them just go throughout the day and the weeks and the months where it's just monotonous, it's boring. You at the very beginning of a relationship, you're on a high, right? You've got those feelings, those emotions that are sweeping over you. I remember that, like, I've told you guys this before, that Whitney and I, we would talk on the phone for like 5 hours a day, just because, like, there was that enrapturing. You guys know this, like, you've had those feelings and those emotions before, but just because you get married, it's not like you're sentenced to prison for life, right? Now, okay, goodness, it's just one woman, it's for your entire life. How much more do you have to talk about? How much more can you do together? How much more closer can you get? I think if you choose to be stagnant, you'll be stagnant, and it'll be boring. And you'll just go on with your days and your life day by day. But if you choose to love, it will stimulate love, even if one is not loving back. If you choose to love, the other will start to express love. When I choose to love, the feelings, the emotions are going to come. When I allow God to love me and I love him back, it's going to bring about a joy. It's going to bring about feelings. Because again, we talk about this a lot, and I've said it a lot, that the agape love that we have is never based on feelings, okay? And that's true. But don't get it mixed up, don't get it wrong, that it's void of feelings. When I say it's not based on feelings, when I make the decision to love, it's not a matter of if I feel like doing it. Because you know what? Sometimes we just don't feel like doing it. But again, what happens is, even though I don't feel like doing it, if I choose to love, what's going to happen, because it's a choice and it's a decision, is those feelings will then match my choice, right? Those feelings will match my choice. So when I start to love God, when I start to love my spouse, well, then those feelings are going to emerge. The passion is going to emerge. The joy, the excitement, all those feelings that, we think we once had are still there, but it has to be a choice. And so in verse 6, let's try and pick this up. In verse 6, he says, "Until the day breaks and the shadows flee, I will go my way to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense." And so here he's just simply expressing how he just wants to spend time with her, right? That he can't wait for the day to end and night to come, right? Until the day breaks and the shadows flee away. He's welcoming the night to come because he knows that this is the appropriate setting for the consummation of the love that they have.